Hello there, I'm Nate and welcome back to my channel, Nate's Vintage Trains. Today's video is part 3 of the famous members of early Southern California Live Steamers history. This is my series for the 12 Days of Christmas, Day 3, if you haven't got that already. This video, we're going in chronological order. Last, we talked about Dick Jackson when he built his railroad starting in about 1930. The next person to start his railroad, or his personal railroad, was Ward Kimball, and it was a bit larger than the 1-inch scale. I'm sure most of you know, but if you don't know, you're in for quite the treat, let me tell you. Ward Kimball was born in Minneapolis on March 4th, 1914. He would attend Santa Barbara School of Arts to become a painter and illustrator in his late teens. At the insistence of one of his teachers at the school, he applied for a job with Walt Disney, and he was hired by him in 1934 at just 20 years old. During the 1930s, he would work on many different short films, including the feature-length cartoon by Disney, the 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He would go on to work for Disney until his retirement in 1973, but remained a consultant thereafter for the Disney Corporation. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, so let's go back a number of years to when he was just 2 years married to his wife Betty. In 1938, the first piece of equipment that Ward would purchase out of his collection for his backyard railroad was not a locomotive, but it was a coach. A full-size, 3-foot narrow-gauge railway coach from the Southern Pacific's narrow-gauge Awenyo branch, or the Lone Pine branch. This car he purchased for the scrap price of $50, full-size coach built in 1881. Southern Pacific 39, originally Carson and Colorado, car number 5. His wife would actually go on to encourage him to purchase a locomotive to go with the new car that he owns. So, this locomotive he purchased in about the same time, 1938, for $400. It was a narrow-gauge 260 Baldwin Mogul locomotive from the Nevada Central Railroad, which had recently abandoned and was selling all of its equipment for scrap. Ward saved the Sidney Dillon, numbered 2, from this railroad. It would take a number of years for him to restore this locomotive, but in 1942 he would get help from the newly formed club Southern California Live Steamers. On October 18, 1942, Southern California Live Steamers had their first annual field day. This was a bit of a get-together, and it was hosted by Ward Kimball. Long hours were spent during this day and even after the fact to lay down about 500 feet of 3-foot gauge track to run his new locomotive and coach. The first steam-up occurred on May 22, 1943, however, it was at a reduced pressure. The locomotive would be restored to full operating condition just not long after that. About this time, he also purchased a Boxcar and Caboose from the recently closed Pacific Coast Railway of San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. He purchased a 042 tank engine, saddle tank, called Poka'a. This was imported with an identical engine named the Ulamana. Ulamana was owned by his friend Jerry Best, who was a railroad historian, and Poka'a was renamed Chloe by Ward Kimball after his own daughter. 2 more freight cars would be purchased from the Southern Pacific narrow gauge in about 1960. This would include a gondola and a stock car. Throughout this time, regular steam-up events were held at his home, and I'm sure some of his large collection of both American and European toy trains and model trains were involved in these events, as well as his collection of fire trucks. He was also involved in a band that was called the Firehouse 5 Plus 2. It was called this because there were 7 members. In 1975, he would build a 4-bench single-truck open car for use behind Chloe when he would operate it. The Emma Nevada proved to be a bit large and noisy for the neighbors, so he mostly operated Chloe on his 500 feet of track, and most of his equipment was stored inside a 3-stall railroad barn, not really a roundhouse. And he also had a separate barn for his fire trucks and then another building for his train collection. In 1993, 2 more cars were added to Chloe's consist, which were 2 open gondola cars. In the 1980s, this collection of his was featured in Tom Snyder's show. It featured his massive toy train collection, both European and American, the Grizzly Flats Depot, his collection of full-size railroad equipment, and some of his fire trucks. Even before then, in about the 1950s, Ward Kimball was featured on Groucho Marx' TV game show, You Bet Your Life. He would talk about his railroad equipment and joke around with Groucho, who happens to be one of my favorite comedians of all time.
Do you have any hobbies, Mr. Kimball? What does a cartoonist do in his spare time?
Well, one of my hobbies, Groucho, is trains.
Trains, huh? Electric or wind-up?
No, I have 3 full-size Baldwin locomotives and 4 big coaches.
In the house?
In my backyard.
You must have a pretty big backyard, huh?
Well, not too big. It's about 3 acres.
Well, you say you have steam engines out there, or diesel engines?
No, don't say diesel.
Steam engines?
Steam. My railroad is only 650 feet long. This railroad has a roundhouse, and it has a water tank and depot, few hand cars.
Tell us about your railroad, Ward. How did you happen to buy this stuff?
Well, I heard that one of the railroads was selling one of its second-hand passenger coaches, which was 40 feet long, for $50, and so I bought it. You see, I can't resist a bargain.
Starting in 1992, Ward would start donating his equipment to the Orange Empire Railway Museum, currently known as the Southern California Railway Museum. Ward Kimball would pass away in 2002, and the rest of his railroad was operated until 2006 by his family. At that time, Chloe was finally donated to the Orange Empire Railway Museum. Meanwhile, the caboose he owned from the Pacific Coast Railway was donated to the California State Railroad Museum. Lastly, the train depot from the Grizzly Flats Railroad, which was a movie prop for the film So Dear to My Heart from 1949. This was used by Ward Kimball for his railroad, like I said, and he also had a water tower built. The depot would be sold to John Lasseter in 2006 along with the water tower for his Juicy Creek Railway. I hope I pronounced that correctly. The water tower and depot were sadly destroyed by fire back in 2017. However, the depot does live on, since the Frontierland Depot at Disneyland is a replica of Ward Kimball's Grizzly Flats Railroad Depot. That same year, in fact, Disneyland reopened its railroad, with festivities being held for the event. Ward Kimball's locomotive Chloe, along with the locomotive Marie E., which was owned by animator Ollie Johnston, which then, at the time, and still is, currently owned by John Lasseter. Both were operated around Disneyland, however, Chloe was towed by the Marie E. I best remember Ward Kimball for a very simple thing he did. As a kid, I would love watching I Love Toy Trains along with Thomas the Tank Engine, of course. Thank you so much for watching again, and I'm Nate for Nate's Vintage Trains, reminding you to always keep it old school, and until next time, God bless and Merry Christmas.
Remember the old saying, he who dies with the most trains wins.